She, we're alive, we're like diamonds in the sky.
Hello, fellow fellows and fellow educators. As you listen to this song, imagine it's being sung or spoken by one of your students with an IEP.
I don't need you to respect me, I respect me. I don't need you to love me, I love me. But I want you to know you can know me if you change your mind. If you change your mind. If you change your mind. Change your mind.
This is a cover I adapted from a show called Steven Universe. I want you to keep culturally relevant teaching in mind and also those students. This presentation is called Culturally Relevant Special Education in Color. It's a qualitative study done by myself for Dr. Shikarpurya's class at the University of Maryland, the Qualitative Methods class in the Education Department for Special Education. This is the agenda that we'll go over, and I will briefly touch on some things. I want to get at the heart of the study, so feel free to pause the video at any time for some of the pages that are a little text heavy, as I won't be reading every single word. The purpose. The abstract is laid out clear in my paper, but the gist is I'm studying the perspectives of special education providers of color in secondary settings. I'm aware that CRE is often confused with CRT, critical race theory, and how it's been under attack since 2020 and even before that. Culturally relevant education has existed since the 90s. However, the political environment in which we're living in today creates a tenuous situation for all educators, but I'm looking specifically at special educators in secondary settings, and specifically those who identify as people of color. The research questions I had for this project are as follows. What are the experiences of special education providers with CRE? What are teachers' perspectives on how CRE can affect the academic performance of our students? And how are teachers of colors resisting the mandates that confuse critical race theory with culturally relevant teaching? There's a couple theories that undergird my work. I won't go into much detail about them, but you can pause to read the definitions. But I'm using critical race theory, which looks at race and the ways in which race plays out in societies, particularly in terms of legislation. It comes from law. In this field, I'm looking at how race is played out in education spaces. I'm also using performance theory. I got my master's in performance theory at NYU, and where the study was created. And I'm looking specifically at how race is performed in these spaces, and even how the role of special educator is performed by teachers in these spaces. Culturally relevant pedagogy, what is it? So we have here Gloria Ladson-Billings, and this is her definition of culturally relevant pedagogy. It has to have and condone academic achievement, cultural competence, social political consciousness. And without all three, you're not doing CRP. This is really important because, as this research shows, along with a synthesis done by Aronson and Laughter, most educators, when they say that they're performing culturally relevant education or culturally relevant pedagogy, they're usually doing two of these things, maybe one, but often they're not getting at the social political consciousness that is crucial to what CRP is. Here, Aronson and Laughter, and this is the definition I use with my participants, summarize culturally relevant pedagogy and culturally responsive teaching and put those terms together to create this framework for what culturally relevant education is. And this is the rubric in which I'm judging the synthesis review that I worked on, and then also the conversations and evidence that my teachers are giving me. The way I collected data is I worked for a New York City public school system for 10 years as a middle school special education provider in New York City. I also was an adjunct professor at Hunter College, and for almost as long as I was teaching middle schoolers. And so I have a wide network. I reached out to that network and also a network of people that I met through the Extreme Teachers organization, from which I became DISC certified. And so I reached out to my network and found some amazing educators. And so the person had to be a secondary special education teacher. They had to identify as a person of color. From there, I reached out and we set up these interviews, these one-on-one semi-structured interviews on Zoom. I drafted 18 questions, which were previewed and workshopped with some fellow researchers in the field within that class with Dr. Shikarpurya. And the interviews lasted 30 to 90 minutes. And a demographics form was also sent before the interview happened to make sure that I got consent and also get a few background information details about the participants. This is an example of one of the questions I asked. The next two slides are also examples of questions. Feel free to pause to read them in more detail. But I want to note that I asked this question particularly because I'm using a critical race lens in my research. It's important that these people identify as people of color and they can examine how that plays a role in their teaching. It might not play a role in their teaching from their perspective or in some tangible way. So those are things that we want to discuss. And then asks about other parts of their identity. And then findings emerge. So we know from our readings that were assigned to us by Cresswell and Hayes and Sings, particularly, that findings don't emerge, that we actually find them. We have to do some work. And so I used an inductive approach, which means I did not start with a theory. I went in only with an identification of what critical relevant education was, but I asked the teachers for their views, what they defined, what they found, and then I used horizontalization, which means I asked questions and I used an Excel sheet to document each teacher's response for each of those questions. I used actual coding to create themes. So I went through and I coded every single interview and identified some themes that came out from the research, which we'll go over in a moment. I also used a few in vivo codes because the participants were so amazing. I used exactly their words to describe their experiences. And I also identified some invariant themes, which means when I looked at their answers, I identified some things that did not match that kind of stuck out. These are the code books that came from my themes. So there are 4 themes that I identified, and these are the definitions for those themes. I'm going to skip this slide so I can explain it more briefly. Authenticity was the first theme. You have to be real with their students. Students can smell fear. They can smell when you're being inauthentic, especially for our students of color and some disabilities. It's crucial that we bring them our whole selves and are authentic with them, with our students. Vibes was another theme that came out. So that Bitmoji there shows like this person's putting on a mask. So it's different to authenticity, but it's the teacher that can see, right, that the student is putting on a mask, that there's something going on here. We have to address the vibes of our classroom and even spiritually. One of the teachers really identified the spiritual aspect of communicating with teachers. Vibes are the ephemeral things that happen in our lives that we can't see, touch, or taste, but exist within our realms to identify a shared understanding, even a shared offense, which came up. Family, right? We want to create bonds with our students, but ultimately we're a family. You don't get to choose your family. Just similarly, we don't get to choose our students. They don't get to choose us. They don't get to choose the students that they are with, but we need to find ways to bridge gaps and create bonds so that academic growth can happen. And hopefully we learn from each other and we grow and we have affection for one another. And then finally, plus or more CRE equals minus or less IEP. One of the interesting things that should have been obvious, but wasn't, that came up in the research was that if we are using culturally relevant and responsive and sustaining practices in our work, it can actually limit the amount of IEPs that are actually diagnosed and even increase the mainstreaming that happens at the secondary level. Most students are not diagnosed or given an IEP at a secondary level. We're usually in the work of sustaining them through graduation or enabling them to be declassified. And so that's something that came up in the work. So more CRE equals less IEP. And finally, in terms of my research reliability and trustworthiness, I use triangulation. Each one of the participants was sent a member check, which I called a trust check form. I sent them a Google document that identified the themes, the code book, and then also 3 or four quotes from each of the participants that match with each one of those themes. So they could verify, does it make sense what I found? And is this really what they said? And is there anything else that they want to add? I also asked, because I conducted these interviews prior to the 2024 election, if there was anything they would like to add post-election. There were professional conversations and personal experiences. So I communicated with Dr. Williams, who is a math researcher, but has also done qualitative research in the area of mathematics with PhD students and PhD students who identify as people of color, particularly Black males. And then I also conducted conversations with my advisor, Dr. Shikarpurya, when she helped me identify and make sure that I was on track with the themes that I was gathering, the procedures, the consent form. She was very helpful in helping me structure this research. And I also thought about my personal experiences. So when someone would say something, did it vibe with how I experienced the education system and culturally relevant education in my time with it? And then finally, I checked it against the literature. So we have at the bottom left, we have Gloria Ladd. Well, I think you can. Yeah, we have Gloria Ladson-Billings, and we have Chris Emdin, we have Zaretta Hammond, we have Geneva Gay, and we have Goldie Muhammad. All of their work swirls around in my head on a constant basis, and their work was used to check, right? Are they actually conducting culturally relevant education as we know it? And now we're on to findings. So these are the 3 documents that I created to summarize the work and the findings that my teachers provided. At the end, I'll give you a chance to look at these in more details, but you can pause here to look at all of them now. And then I created a song that actually summarizes the findings here. So I'm going to play the song and you'll see the lyrics. It is supposed to be a little corny. So if there's a part, especially at the end, that you're like, wow, like it's supposed to be, it is what it is. But I hope overall you get the gist of my work. And then after you just hear the song and see the lyrics, I'm going to take a moment to identify specific parts of the song that represent some of the themes that went into it, and a little bit on how I created it to show my process.
This is a Diamond Emerald production. I'm Mary, not contrary, just as interested in settling for low standards, and that's letting families in. Come to my service and pay your tithes. I survive off vibes. Taking a line from Rita Pearson. Kids don't learn when they don't like you. I can hear kids screaming in the hall. I'm about to crash out. I'll even teach you. Come to my room and we'll work it out. But it's not by accident. I'm intentional and I'm proving it. Halloween Town, that's our classic. They're a different demographic. Gen X, Z, or Alpha, whatever your age, I'ma learn all about ya. Mary don't play no games. She's here for the kids, not here for the lames. More CRE equals less IEP. I said more CRE equals less IEP. Hey Zoe, enter my space and you will touch hope. That is my sequence and it is my scope. My work is my worship and my work is my praise. The community I was raised in, I'm now raised. Soy Americana, soy Dominicana. I'm what it looks like to succeed and return to sow seeds in my own flower beds, to teach what I have learned. I let the Holy Spirit guide and insight from above. Things that take you far, wisdom, patience, and love. More CRE equals less IEP. I'm Genesis, the Jamaican sis. We connect due to our race, the sharing of this space. Family in this place with special populations. There is something that we lack. My kids had years of teachers, but I was the first one Black. They felt they couldn't relax. They felt they couldn't engage. When offense hit our skin, we shared the Black rage and turned it into resistance. Say test didn't miss us. Coming out on top is our story. African diaspora is our glory. More CRE equals less IEP. We said more CRE equals less IEP. Go Diamond. Kids with IEPs are stigmatized, marginalized, and often dehumanized, which Blacks and immigrants recognize. Now CRE is nominalized. More CRE equals less IEP. Cite the chorus, family vibes, and authenticity.
All right, so verse 1 is from a participant called Mary. These are all pseudonyms. And she really made a point to demonstrate that She wasn't there to pay lip service or to accommodate any of the adults around who weren't interested in culturally relevant education, which means they weren't interested in her students and their lived experiences. She put a lot of emphasis on not using jargon in IEP meetings. She put a lot of emphasis on vibes. She's actually the person who said, like, I survive off vibes, right? And so she also mentioned how kids don't learn when students don't like you. And that's actually something that Rita Pearson had mentioned in a beautiful TED talk that she presented that I think every teacher should watch. She also mentioned how, students would be in another situation, another classroom, and there would be a disconnect between what the student is saying and what the teacher is actually hearing. So a student actually said, I'm about to crash out. And the teacher in this situation felt threatened, felt that the student was going to be violent, right? However, because Mary understood the student's culture, and even though they don't understand the student per se, she has students who come to her she doesn't actually teach, right? She knew that the student wasn't trying to be violent. They were literally about to have a meltdown. They were being frustrated, right? It's a turn of phrase, and they needed a break, right? Not that they were going to be violent. They needed a break. So again, just so we go, I don't even teach you, come to my room and we'll work it out, right? She has a safe space for students. Other students tell their friends, oh, this is a teacher that you can go to. She's understanding, she's cool, she's this, she's that. They call her auntie, right? All this type of familial learning. She also highlighted a key aspect of the work that showed that generational differences are not often talked about. She mentioned Halloween Town in her classroom, which as a fellow millennial, I'm like, oh my gosh, yeah, that's great. That's a classic. That's our classic. However, the students are a different demographic. They had no idea what she was talking about. I can definitely relate to this in terms of I'd ask my students, what are you watching? What should I be watching? And then based on what they're watching, I can make those connections, particularly in social studies, to things that were going on in the classroom. So then we have Zoe, right? She says, enter my space and you will touch hope. This is my sequence. This is my scope. When I asked Zoe about what she enjoyed about being a teacher and her role now as a community organizer and supporter of her community, was her ability to transmit hope to the people around her. She's a Christian and is very faith motivated. The organization she now works at is faith based. So to say my work is my worship and my work is my praise. The community I was raised in, I now raise. She teaches and lives in the community that she was raised in. That's the same for Mary. And they both talked about the authenticity that comes from people being able to identify you in the community and know that you're there for a reason. She's a Dominican woman and identifies as Dominican. She doesn't identify as Black. And so I included that aspect in there to represent that. And she mentioned how she loves being Hispanic and being bilingual, and not just bilingual and communicating with students in different languages, which she can do, but also being bilingual and understanding the different cultures of those students she works with. And that's something that Gloria Ladson-Billings mentioned, that every teacher needs to be multicultural, not just to understand the culture of themselves, but understand the cultures of the students and other people. And that's a constant thing, right? Because we're getting new batches of students every year. She is an example of what it looks like to succeed and stay in her community, and also to sow seeds in the flower beds where she learned. And then lastly, I let the Holy Spirit guide, getting insight from above, things that take you far, wisdom, patience, and love. So she mentioned the Holy Spirit and the spirit of discernment and allowing her to see the needs of students. Those are also goes to vibes, right? Those things you can't really touch. And she mentioned that wisdom, patience, and love really go far in education. And we sometimes take that for granted. Finally, but not least, we have Genesis, who is a Jamaican immigrant and who really demonstrated that she was able to connect with her students based on race, right? That this Blackness was something that she and the students identified that connected them. And this created a familiar environment, because she even mentioned how having students felt more comfortable because they had a teacher, her, that looked like their parents, that looked like their community members. And she also mentioned how she uses her family as examples when she's talking to the students, and also brings in other immigrants like on career day so the students can see themselves as successful like she is and like her community is. She says, with special populations, there's something that we lack. My kids had years of teachers, but I was the first one Black. So she mentioned in a secondary setting and in middle school that a student was just overjoyed and aghast that she was a Black teacher in the space and that she'd never had a Black teacher. This goes to, of course, we know the disproportionality of white teachers in the space and Black students in this space. So this is also why I'm looking at this phenomenon in a critical race lens, and I'm also identifying specifically teachers of color, because even though I do believe and I know that there are more teachers of color around than what is suggested or even said, there still is an overpopulation of white female teachers in this space, and that is represented in the literature. Often when we read studies, it's assumed that these teachers are white and female unless it's mentioned that they collected demographics. And a lot of these studies said that they didn't collect demographics. So one way that I'm addressing this is by intentionally seeking people of color in my research and citing the demographics in every study that I teach, because we all have something to share. And I believe that by getting voices of color in the mix, it's not going to be something revolutionary where it's like, whoa, these Black teachers are doing and saying things that are completely different. Quite the contrary. I think that coming together and identifying the shared strengths and the shared needs, we can leverage the expertise of people of color in the realm of culturally relevant pedagogy and the realm of special education instruction, so that it can strengthen the field, bring more people in the field, and also just create the equity that we say that we want. What's next? It says they felt they could relax, they felt they could engage. When offense hit our skin, we shared the Black rage. She actually shared an example of how a co-teacher actually said something very offensive to the students, and the students and her shared in that disgust, shared in that disdain. The students even voiced, like, Miss Genesis would never have said that to us. She would never have disrespected us in that way. And that happens. And that's also connected to vibes, right? You can be in a space, someone says something, and then the people of color or the people who have a shared identity will identify the shared offense when other people might not. And even explaining that shared offense to the party who made the offense can be very uncomfortable. And also sometimes people have just, I'm not going to teach that to you. It's just wrong, right? So I noted that also as an example of vibes. She mentioned, and turned it into resistance. State test didn't miss us. Coming on top is our story. African diaspora is our glory. So through this process, she also mentioned that these students came out on top, right? They knew who to go to. They felt more comfortable in the space, and they did well academically on the state test that year. She's the only teacher that actually connected culturally relevant education to state test performance in this way, while other teachers mentioned other aspects of academic performance, including comfort, including, being able to submit classwork on time, complete homework because they had someone to work with them with it in their language, those type of academic successes. And then the bridge comes in. Diamond says, kids with IEPs are stigmatized, marginalized, and often dehumanized, which Blacks and immigrants recognize. Now CRE is phenomenalized. More CRE equals less IEP. Cite the chorus, which is this, right? Family, vibes, and authenticity, right? The chorus, family, vibes, and authenticity were the themes of my research. So that is how I constructed the song, and I added elements of the lived experience and the perspectives of my participants within the lyrics. Now moving on to implications. So to shape my findings as a practitioner, these findings shape my practice as a researcher as I've gained knowledge on how to conduct, right, this qualitative study to properly code and analyze the data. And it will push me to ask better questions and have more open and less judgmental relationships to myself and my participants. Because I know the majority of my participants, when I say judgmental, I just mean I'm coming in with some type of expectations. I can't get rid of that, right? I believe in them greatly. I think they're going to say great things. I want to know about their lives and what's going on. If I don't know them, I may be overly too accepting of what they have to say, or I may be a little awkward in trying to make sure that I honor their voices, right? Which is why follow up and connecting with them is really important. And even myself, it was a strenuous and a crazy process going through it, but I believe that having done this, I will be more confident going forward. And then this work impacts students in special education settings in the following ways. I conducted professional development with these teachers. Reflection is a key part of any professional development experience and a key part of teaching itself. By answering these questions, these teachers had to reflect on their experiences, reflect on their knowledge of culturally relevant education and the ways in which they use it in their classroom. Because I know and have coached some of these teachers, this also led to some conversations afterwards where we could increase the conversation regarding what can you do now and what other areas of cultural relevancy, including disability culture can we engage in our classroom? And then also, publishing this work can motivate and encourage everyone working in educational justice for educational justice in hostile environments and reduce the higher rate of diverse students continuing to have IEPs. Blending culturally relevant education with special education instruction, right, is the sauce, is the key to making the gains that we want and desire. It should be implemented in the literacy plans in schools. It should be implemented in the vision plans. It should be implemented in STEM. It should just be a way of life, which is hopefully what we're going towards. The next step in my research, I have 5 already confirmed more participants to interview. I would like to get more and conduct a larger qualitative study of anywhere from 10 to 20 teachers. I will begin the process of getting IRB approval so that I can continue this work into dissertation work. And then finally, I need to do some reading, right? Discrit theory came up a lot in my work that I didn't get a chance to really dive into. I have some texts around Black education that I want to get into in terms of like educations of African Americans in the South after Reconstruction. All this history is relevant to what's happening now, particularly in Maryland, which is a state that is racially charged in an interesting way. And then finally, Black feminism and Black performance are other 2 areas that I'm familiar with, but would love to do more engaged research in. Here are more particularly are some quotes from the participants. I identified them and their pseudonyms, generally where they are from. And then we have some quotes that align to each of the themes. So I will be quiet. I will scroll through as you have a chance to read them. These are still quotes from Mary. And now we're on to Genesis. And Zoe. So hopefully you saw some examples of some of the quotes, how they fit into the song. This is what I'll be doing over the next few months and technically over the next few years, right? And the rest of my life, really. I'm going to read and write and speak and teach forever. That's the end of my presentation. Thank you so much. And feel free to reach out if you're a special education provider of color and you want to be a part of this process. Please reach out to me, diamondemerald.org. My UMD email is diamondw@umd.edu. And fear not, shine bright, have a wonderful, wonderful day.